Please welcome co-founder and chief operating officer of Rent Responsibly, Alexa Nota, and short-term rental host, Angelique Lewis, in conversation with Skift senior hospitality editor, Sean O'Neill.
So we've had earlier in the day, we started out with investors, and after this session, we're going to hear from Booking.com and Airbnb. So this is part of the time where we hear from what do the hosts want? A lot of times it doesn't happen in events like this. So we have two representatives. We have Alexa, a co-founder of Rent Responsibly, an advocacy group. And we have Angie, who's a super host. You have properties in about 3 states, a few states.
A few states, yes.
So thank you both very much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
So I guess I'm going to start off. The session title is "What Do Hosts Want?" So maybe Alexa, what do hosts want?
It's a great question. In the work that we do, we work really closely, primarily with local alliances, some state alliances of short-term rental operators, which encompasses everybody from home sharers all the way up to big property managers. And so through our work, we admin or help admin things like Facebook pages and inboxes. And so we field a lot of the questions that hosts have. We're also in a number of other Facebook groups. So we see a lot of the same questions out there, out in the world. And outside of regulations and compliance information, what we see a lot of are the very basic Host 101 FAQs, the things that quite often as a brand new host, you learn the hard way if you don't have a place that you can go to learn things proactively, like something programmatic or some universal vacation rental school or short-term rental school of some kind. So, for example, what we see a lot is the questions about service animals, or how do I handle this really bad guest? How do I know if this is an okay booking to take? All of those FAQs that many of you probably experienced when you were just starting out, or you've heard from homeowners, or you've heard from other people in the industry, are still the number one things that people are looking for.
Cool. So just to be clear, so what happens is they've accumulated this knowledge, they fine-tune and find a way what's the most accessible, depending whether you're in an aspirational stage or you need a more educational stage. They provide the information and then it gets filtered down. So if you're starting out somewhere and you're Googling around or using Instagram or however it is that you're finding information, it will then get passed along into the environment and people then find out about what Rent Responsibly is doing. That's a way that is that fair to say?
Yeah, and not just us. VRMA is a great example, local alliances. There are a number of mastermind communities that are really great, but the key is that those hosts have to be searching the right terms or stumble upon those types of things. Otherwise, they're just kind of out in the wild. And I don't know about your experience, but what I see a lot of hosts doing is turning to these Facebook groups that are the worst possible places to go for advice. You get either great answers or terrible answers, and as a new host, you don't know which is which. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, Angie, tell us a little bit about your experience. You've been doing this for a while now, but so tell us what your property collection is.
Yeah, so I operate 6 short-term rental units throughout the U.S. I started off in Birmingham, Alabama, and what got me into short-term rentals and just my passion for real estate overall was my grandmother. So,
God bless.
Yeah, she's still here. She's still, in my ear telling me what to do with my next moves. But no, she really did really well in New York City, which is a really, hard area to get into. But she does long-term rentals. So when I, learned a little bit about long-term rentals, I was like, there got to be something else that I could do. And as a frequent traveler myself, I started staying in a bunch of Airbnbs all over the world, and I was like, you know what, I could do this. I could do this.
You can do this.
I took my passion, my design techniques from New York City, started off in Birmingham, and it was a hit. So from then on, I expanded and scaled off. But I think I am one of the few who didn't have the proper resources or tools when I first got started. There wasn't like a person to really guide me through the program, and community is important, but we unfortunately tend to pass around the wrong information in our communities, to say the least.
So what are some lessons learned the hard way? What are some things that you wished you'd known early on?
Some lessons that I know personally I had to learn the hard way was finding the right teams.
Right.
Finding cleaning teams, knowing the difference between short-term rental cleaners and actual, residential cleaners. There's a difference. So, learning that throughout my journey.
So like
was a
for
challenge.
housekeeping, the kind of housekeeper I'd have to just do one quick cleaning from a house, you want a different kind of.
Yeah, your friend from up the street could say, hey, yeah, I use so-and-so, she's amazing. And, it doesn't transpire for my guests. So
Gotcha.
There's a difference there.
Okay. So Alexa, there was a conversation earlier today about regulation, and that one of the panelists sort of pointed out that it'd be better to have have the industry have sort of more accreditation rather than have like they're having in San Diego. You have more of a licensing approach. So how would you like to see things evolve in the sector?
That's a great question. I think accreditation is inevitable, and it's coming at us more rapidly than in years past. I might guess that coming out of COVID, when cleaning standards were a big thing in regulatory and other discussions, it might have bubbled up accreditation to the surface a lot more in recent years. In between now and then, though, I see the industry as needing some programmatic education, particularly for new hosts. I would guess, and I'm sure you guys have data on this somewhere, that the number one way new hosts come into our industry is just by throwing a listing on Vrbo or Airbnb. I haven't done that in 8 years. I haven't been in property management in 8 years, so I did this a couple weeks ago to see what the process was like. And there were some resources in the onboarding process for how to do things responsibly, how to check out what your local laws are and get your permits, and put in place some good neighbor practices like smart house rules and things like that. But once you have a listing, you have to go find all that information on your own, and you have to guess at what you need. None of us are sitting there in kindergarten saying, when I grow up, I want to be a short-term rental host, and training for this for 20 years. We just start it on a whim quite often. And so what we talk about in a lot of our work, especially when we talk about regulations, is that our industry is in a state of, or state very similar to what the auto industry was 100 years ago. You had the assembly line all of a sudden make cars really accessible, and then all of a sudden you had a flood of automobiles out onto roads that were built for horse and buggies, no rules, no traffic lights, no lanes, nothing. The initial reaction to that, much like we've seen in short-term rentals, was, oh, we've got to ban the car. We shouldn't have this. This isn't a good thing. But over the last, or over 90 years since then, we developed things like driver's ed and lanes and traffic lights and seat belts and insurance and inspections and all those things that we all now see as standard and normal and fine and great, because that means if I'm a responsible driver and somebody else isn't, they're going to get pulled over, get a ticket, get their license revoked, whatever, and it's not going to affect me while I'm being responsible. The short-term rental industry does not have 90 years to figure this out. We needed to figure it out 5 years ago. So what I would love to see is something like a driver's ed or some type of program where as soon as you start hosting, you need to go do this program. I'll use a more contemporary example. Lime scooters faced very similar challenges when they were first coming out.
So these are like those scooters you can rent in various cities, yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So if you remember, the initial reaction was, these are unsafe, these are everywhere, we need to ban them. What Lime figured out was under 1% of rides had issues. It's a very similar stat to short-term rentals. Within that, under 1% were significant safety issues. So while it's such a small number, it's causing this domino effect of cities wanting to ban scooters, which is not a sustainable solution. So Lime looked at, or created a traffic school for first-time riders. They found that of those incidences, most of them were happening with first-time riders. They have a traffic school where you can go and do your first 5 rides in a controlled environment, get the hang of the scooters if you're brand new to them, and then issues went way down.
Cool. That reminds me of something from the regulation panel earlier today. Mary Lee Carr was talking about from in Seville in Spain. They introduced noise awareness devices. They're sort of requiring short-term rental operators to have noise awareness devices in their place, rather than sort of like banning them. Is like, how can we target what exactly is the issue and come up with a programmatic solution? I guess. I hear where you're coming from on that. I kind of feel like one of the problems with the U.S. is that we have certifications and everything. It's like elite overproduction. We got so many. We have more people getting degrees for things than we have jobs for them to a certain extent. And what's so charming and nice about short-term rentals is there's this huge opportunity. It's low barrier to entry. I feel like I can have a side hustle and it's appealing. So like Angie, like when you think back to when you were starting, like would it have deterred you or would it have encouraged you to have like badging or certification or classes?
I would personally say it probably would have encouraged me maybe a little bit more to get started quicker.
Okay.
I will say.
Cool.
My honest hesitation was, the safety around it. I wanted to start with a room, and I was a little concerned about that. But if I knew that there were a little bit of, procedures and standards that took place, I would feel like it was a little bit more interactive versus how it is. Shockingly, against what everybody else says, I feel like it's a little too easy to get started, which worries me. And I say that because the communities that I'm around, they're getting into it as a hobby, and the standards aren't the same. So now the guests are looking at everybody and judging us as a whole, when a lot of us are trying to really take this serious, and it's our livelihood. So,
Right.
Yeah.
You have a cool name for your company. What is it?
Yeah, it's Two Lavish Escapes.
I love it. Okay, Lavish Escapes. I would say, so if you were positive, you think that this would help, I'm sort of wondering if you would say, like, what are some other things, like pricing tools? Are there other parts of the process that you feel you would also like to have, like training, education, or resources of some kind?
Personally, not to talk about it again, but I think with cleaning, that would help with teams. And kind of like give us as hosts a little bit more to look forward to. It makes interviewing a little bit easier if they know exactly what to do and what we're expecting, and not just saying yes, they'll do it and then don't. So that would have definitely helped. And yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think that's like the only part that I think. And other than just us ourselves, learning our processes, maybe not just the reviews make you a super host, maybe a little bit more, just challenge us. We got this.
Yeah, we got this. Whenever I hear superhost, I'm like, superhost. I just like, so what is it is your goal to like get to like have 30 properties or something at some point?
Eventually. My real goal is to have an apartment building.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. That's awesome.
Working there.
So I guess I heard at a party last night that the editorial brand Short-Term Rentals had a party, and I was talking to Phil Kennard from Future Stay. They have a new product coming out soon that's aimed specifically at people who are coming into the market at the top of the funnel. And one of the data points that he gave me was that at Airbnb, and I'm not going to quite get this completely right, but it was roughly for every new listing that came in that was professionally run, meaning someone already had another property. There were 2 listings that come in that are completely new. The person has never had inventory. And that's not the same thing as translating to actual bookings. Like I think the actual booking volume at Airbnb is really driven by professionally managed at this point. But in terms of understanding, there's a huge, tens of thousands of people, every month are trying to learn, and it's a complete sea. Like I was trying to figure out, and I live in Washington D.C., what the short-term regulations were, and it was just a whole endless list of websites and stuff. What would you like to see next, Alexa? Like, who are the partners? Is it up to the Airbnbs of the world to sort of like take the leadership on this, since they're the ones who are mainly interacting with?
In terms of educating hosts on the regulatory side?
That, or on some of taking the lead on like certification or accreditation of those issues?
I absolutely think every single player in this industry has a role to play when it comes to education and to supporting accreditation. I think accreditation itself does need to be managed by a third party, just to make it impartial, and available to every other platform, every other direct booking site. it needs to be like they do it in the UK with Quality and Tourism. It's an impartial third party that manages their accreditation, and that's the best way to go.
Can I tap in on that?
Please.
I definitely agree with that. I think it needs to be somebody on the outside, a third party, handling it for short-term rentals, mid-term rentals, maybe even long-term rentals.
Okay.
You know.
Cool. So Alexa, do you see, like, there was this, in San Diego, they've sort of like decided licensing is the way that they want to go, and especially as you think towards your futures. Is that something that is a good outcome for you? Or, I mean, that's another option on the table.
Yeah, me personally, I don't think it would be the greatest outcome. I like to spread out my eggs and not put them in one basket for that specific reason.
Mm-hmm.
So it would just incur a little bit more, and it would make it a little bit more challenging for me to grow, in my personal opinion. I would have to see it all laid out in front of me to see what my options would be, though.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Alexa, what's your instinct on licensing? That seems like it's another straightforward option. The state could just do it.
The state could do it. I think it's a really interesting question. I am not against licensing on its face. I do think licensing, or at least registration, is a really good thing because it enables cities to enforce against the bad operators who make things really hard for everybody else. There has to be some level of enforcement to get those drunk drivers off the road, to use that analogy. I do take a lot of issue with some of the license requirements, and even more so in the education of a community after something is passed. Cities are notoriously bad at communicating their rules and making it easy to comply. Of course, there are great examples of cities that do it well. And there is a big responsibility on cities themselves to create these schemes that are enforceable, are easy to comply with, and really easy for hosts to do what they want to do. We talk to hosts all the time who want to get their permits, who want to pay their taxes, and it is incredibly difficult to do, why? I mean, that's just ridiculous to me. And so we and the organizations that we work with spend a lot of time doing things like creating registration checklists and translating ordinances into plain English language and summing everything up in one nice spot. It's not that hard to do, but that is one of the things that I think we as an industry have to do. Yes, it'd be great if the cities would do it themselves, but there is a lot of self-education and self-enforcement that we can be doing within our space.
Okay. Yeah, Lawrence Tosi, at the beginning of our day, he said that everyone in the room sort of has a responsibility to get in on advocacy, because the hotel sector, I was just at the hotel leading investment conference earlier this week, and they are so organized. They have sessions and workshops, and they say, here, you go act on this infrastructure bill. Hey, we want to take action on this. I'm sort of wondering, Alexa, the issue of party houses comes up a lot, nuisance noise. We sort of talk around it. What is your sense of what is the right way to address that as a particular issue?
I think it's a combination of things. I think it starts from within, where especially new hosts, but everybody knows exactly what they need to do and look out for to head off things like parties and noise and parking issues. The nuisance issues, noise, parking, trash are still probably the #1 triggers for overregulation. Housing is now a big one. I don't know which one of those tips the scale more at this point, but that is something that is incredibly preventable from our side if we're diligent about it. I'll go back to this, what we kind of started with, which was education and content. Our #1 most popular piece of content 2 years in a row is, how do I communicate my house rules to guests in a friendly but firm way? We see a ton of hosts who want to make it clear to their guests before they arrive or before they book what they can and can't do. They can't be loud after quiet hours. They need to park in the designated spots. You need to take trash out at whatever time. But they also don't want to create anything less than a 5-star experience, which is totally understandable. So it's finding really simple things like, how do I explain this rule in a friendly way, but in a way that doesn't leave any room for a guest to accidentally or intentionally get around that rule.
So is there a shorthand example of one way of doing that?
Sure. If, for example, you have a guest pre-booking asking if they can host their bachelor party at your property and your property cannot accommodate things like that, it's really easy to say, that party sounds awesome. We don't host parties, but there is a great venue 2 blocks away that will host your party for you. Let me give you their number.
Right.
Super easy.
I also think communicating with everybody in the local areas kind of helps out with that as well. So if you know somebody who owns an event space, connect them.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I really like the handoff part. That makes it much more friendly, and you're helping solve their problem, not just. So, Angie, there are other people who are out there who they're considering coming into this. They're nervous about doing it. You've had this experience. What would be your message to them to feel confident that they can do it?
I would honestly tell them you can do it. Like, that is the easiest way to say it. I think oftentimes fear gets in the way of everything. It hinders us a little bit from making that next step and moving forward into a new business venture. But at the end of the day, you have no reward without risk. So.
And what's one of the things that you like most about this besides the money?
Besides the money, it's just the experience in meeting people from all over the world. Like I told you guys, I love to travel, and I would be that one friend who makes the itinerary. I'll have it mapped out all day, every day. We may not make everything, but we'll make most of it. So, giving that experience to somebody that I've never met, they actually appreciate it a little bit more because they don't have to do the brain work. So, yeah.
That's cool. We all need an Angie in our life. Well, thank you very much, guys, for this conversation. I really appreciate it and learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.